if I've ever told you my Paul Rudd story. Have I told you my Paul Rudd story, Brad?
I don't think you've ever told me your Paul Rudd story.
All right, so I need to give you some bigger context. So my wife works in television, so we meet a lot of Hollywood people, right?
Yeah.
But the weird thing, and she commented on it all the time, is that for the most part, I don't care. Like they're interesting. That's like, oh, hey, I met so-and-so. But for the most part, I don't watch that much TV or movies for the most part, right?
Yeah.
And so I am not like an aficionado. I'm not a go-to fan.
Right.
However, Brad, there are like 2 or 3 people in Hollywood that I would die to meet, and one of them is Paul Rudd. Something about Paul Rudd I just find delightful and charming, and I feel
Really?
and people that know him and know me, they're like, oh, you guys would get along great. Oh, Paul's amazing, and I just love his acting. I love the way he delivers a joke. I just love his kind of put upon nature. I think it's delightful. Okay, long story short, Glow and I get invited by a buddy to go to the Avengers 2 premiere, right? Mm-hmm. And or maybe it was Avengers 2. And Paul had just been cast as Ant-Man, and so he was there. Like Marvel had invited him along to the premiere, right? I guess he was in. Boy, this story's falling apart. Anyway, he was at the party, is the long story short. And so Dave Kellett, really good at telling stories, apparently.
Never let the facts get in the way of a good story.
I know, right? So anyway, so we're standing there, we're sipping, Dave Kellett's hitting the free food as usual.
Yeah.
That's the big part of the story.
So you're in a good mood.
Our buddy goes, oh, there's Paul. You wanted to meet him, didn't you? And Brad, I just imagine like holding hands and skipping down the beach as we're best friends. And oh, look at us, we're sharing French fries because one of us is done at the hamburger place. And oh, look at Brad, he's over for Christmas and we got sweaters on and we're sharing cocoa, right? All of this stuff. And literally goes, oh, Paul's right there. I'll pull him over. And the friend pulls him over and goes, Paul, I want you to meet Dave. Dave, I want you to meet Paul. And I go, and the onus is on me. I'm the one like bugging him. The onus is on me to say something interesting or be interesting at all. Normally, Brad, I would like to think I'm a pretty good conversationalist. I could jump in with the best of them and go. Brad, I look like I had never read a book. I look like I had never spoken the English language before. I look like I couldn't put 2 words together. And anyway, Paul, to his great credit, he gives it about 2 minutes, and then he kind of leans forward, touches me on the arm, and goes, well, I gotta go, so we'll catch up later at the party, and like scoots off. And I'm like, man, I could not have blown that more. That was the worst. Oh. That was just the worst. And like to the point now where I'm joking with my wife that like we will at some point meet him again around Hollywood. Yeah. And I'm hoping beyond hope that he'll never remember me. I'm just the guy that was fumfering at a party, and I can start fresh like, Paul, how lovely to meet you for the first time. For the first time ever.
Oh, poor Dave. If only you would have had a cup of hot cocoa to share.
Or some matching Christmas sweaters at the beach.
That would have been at least a good icebreaker. Like, do you want to have a sip of my cocoa? That's a good opening line.
That's a known Dale Carnegie conversation starter. It's like, always offer a cup of cocoa as you say their name 10 times, Brad Geiger.
I wondered, so last time I was in Los Angeles, I jumped into your car and you didn't see me, but I was rummaging through your glove compartment. You had a packet of Swiss Miss with the words Paul Rudd written on it. That must be your emergency cocoa. Is that what that is?
Yes, that is my... Can I tell you, the amount of setup, that was so delightful. The amount of setup for that joke. You weren't paying attention, but I was rummaging through your glove compartment. That is such a long walk for the Swiss Miss joke. I am here for it. That was great. Dave, I went through your closet and I noticed you had a matching set of Christmas sweaters, and I couldn't help but notice that one of them had the label inside that says "For Paul Rudd."
Oh God!
Well, I imagine though, Brad, that never happens to you. You're probably a smooth talker when you meet people, right?
This is one of my favorite stories of all time. So. And you were around for it. This was the first year that Keen Spot went to San Diego Comic-Con. This would have been what,
so like
2001? 2000,
2001.
Right. So we're all out at Keen Spot. They've got a booth. They're rotating people through the chairs, right? And we have a panel. And I was selected to be one of the people on the panel for the We had gone up there. We have a panel at Comic-Con International.
Oh, yeah. The first time you get a panel at Comic-Con just feels amazing.
We thought we had the world by the short hairs. And this was the first, and I think last time that my wife accompanied me to Comic-Con because she wanted to see it. And after that, she never wanted to see it again. But she was at this panel. And after the panel, one of the very early Greystone Inn fans, who was kind of a younger kid, not like maybe young 20s, right? He was in his young 20s. He comes up to me and he says, "Are you Brad Geiger?" And he's spitting and he's spottling and he can't make a sentence. And I just very calmly, grab him by the shoulder and I say, "Yes, I am, and thank you so much. You really that's so special. I appreciate that." And he asked for my autograph and I signed a book for him and we posed for a picture and it was wonderful. We walk away. My wife says, laughing, "Oh my God, you've got a fanboy." Right? And we're like, whoever would have thought that I would have had a fanboy, but this guy was so overwhelmed to meet me that he couldn't get a sentence out. And it was delightful. He was a wonderful, really nice guy. 3 minutes later, we're walking back, and I realized that John Buscema is on the show floor just a few steps away. And I'm like, he's the author, he's the artist of the How to Make Webcomics book. I love he's one of my top 3 all-time Marvel Comics artists.
No, not how to make webcomics.
What did I say? How to draw comics how to draw comics the Marvel way.
You're still flustered years later. That's what's happening.
Yes. So I come around the corner and here he is, one of the triumvirate artists in my lifetime. And I come around and I go, "Are you John Buscema?" I'm spitting and spottling and I'm making wet all over the table. And he grabs me by the shoulder and he says, "Yes, thank you so much. That's very special." And he signed my copy of How to Make Comics the Marvel Way.
Brad, you were like one rung there in the great circle of life of fandom.
Yeah, I went from the top to the bottom in like 3 seconds.
You're like the coyote that kills the rabbit only to turn around and see a giant black bear right behind you going, "Hello, good morning."
Yes. And I just hold up a little sign that says, "Mother."
That is good to know that I am not the only one that had a fanboy moment. It's humbling when you are legit moved to silence and frankly stammering stupid things because you don't know what to say.
And it isn't that, in my case, it wasn't that I had a list of things that I could have said. My mind literally went blank, like nothing was happening up there.
Yeah. Wow. That it's not unlike what I you know what it was? The whole time I was trying to talk to Rudd, I was like, something witty. And like I was spinning on that idea and as a result, nothing came out.
Yeah.
Anyway, so this has been another episode of Socializing with Dave and Brad, the new Dale Carnegie book we're writing. You're going to love it. How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's a new title from us.
Yeah. Don't socialize like my co-host.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why we went into cartooning. We'll see you next week, everybody. Anyway, on that note, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show about making comics.
And making my mind went blank.
Brad, I'm not John Buscema. You can just talk to me normally.
And making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, editor of webcomics.com and cartoonist of Evil Inc.
And I'm his friend Dave Kellett, who is not John Buscema. I am the cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/ComicLab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. I'm excited to get into this because I feel like the last 2 shows have been really strong. So I want to start off with a really good question from Jonathan Small. And this comes in as a Patreon backer over at patreon.com/ComicLab. He writes, "Brad and Dave, I love the show. Immediate question, accusatory. How much do you pander? How much do you write to the market? And how much do you write or draw what you want? Normally and for your not suitable for work stuff." So Evil Inc. After Dark, Sheldon Drive. How much do we pander and write to the market, and how much do we write truly what we want to write? Brad, this is a great question. I don't know that we've ever been asked this before.
No.
Literally ever.
And it's such a good question because immediately, this is a beautiful question because immediately your hackles get up and you say, I don't pander at all. What kind of a question is that? And then I started going back over my career, and I've got a couple stories I want to tell you.
Okay.
So in doing Lightning Lady, who is like a core character of Evil Inc., first appeared in Greystone Inn as almost like a one-shot character. And if you look at her in Greystone Inn, she was very, there was no curves to that, but she was almost olive oil flat. There was nothing, a straight line down. And it was because I thought to myself, I'm not going to do that thing where I draw an overly sexualized supervillain character. I'm going to avoid that. I'm going to make this a really good character, and I can do that without doing that.
Which is virtually how you do it now, right? That's almost identical.
Well, what happened was... I'll just let that question hang in the air. What happened was nobody paid attention, okay? And that's the key word there. No, and part of that I have to put in. My writing was not where I would have hoped it would have been. We have to always put that caveat in there. I wasn't a great writer, still ain't, but I wasn't where I should have been. And but what I did notice is as I started to draw her more curvy, I got more attention. And guess what? I got into this business to get attention. And so did you, and so did everybody else who does comics. No matter what they tell you, they're doing this because they want attention. Otherwise, why post it on the web where people are going to see it and risk attention? We're doing it because we want attention. And I just noticed, geez, I'm getting a lot more feedback from this character as I'm drawing her a different way. And then much later on, I was kind of grappling with this idea of doing not safe for work stuff. And I did an illustration that was way on the other side and had it was a great illustration. But again, I was like, I'm not going to fall back on all of that stuff. I'm going to try to address a completely different audience. And again, I put it out there. It had all kinds of things going for it: diversity, gender diversity, ethnic diversity, able-bodied, non-able-bodied. It had all these things that I thought it's going to hit these notes and get a real chord of resonance out there. And crickets, nothing. And again, that was shortly after that I announced doing Not Safe for Work and got this amazing influx of Patreon backers. So I looked at those two times in my life and I said, well, yeah, I was pandering. Clearly I was pandering. And then I thought about it some more and I thought, wait a minute. I was pandering both times. Only once I got a response for my pandering, and the other times I wasn't. When I drew a olive oil Lightning Lady, I was very much pandering. It didn't resonate. It didn't hit for whatever reason. And then I pandered another direction, and it got a response. Everything you do is pandering. Because everything you do, you're trying to get a response from it. So to say, do you pander? And this is where I really kind of bristled a little bit at the question, because he says normally and for not safe for work, like not safe for work isn't normal, which I bristled at. All of it is pandering. Everything you do to try to get, you try to hit an audience, you try to resonate. Now, it's only pandering if you're doing that and you really don't feel it. In other words,
right.
if I were to start, and by the way, I'll tell you, so all of it is pandering in terms of attention getting. Sometimes it's pandering that I think is a waste of time. In other words, I'm going to tell you, I think all pandering is good. except the waste of time pandering. And that's when I create a character, and we've talked about this on the show. I'm not a pet person. I'm not a cat person. I'm not a dog person.
By the way, I've been teasing Brad mercilessly since I got a dog because I keep coming up with like ways to sprinkle my dog into conversation just so Brad goes, God, the damn dog. What are we talking? Oh, Brad, you gotta listen to what little Schmoopy Boopy did today. Yeah. Oh, he's such a sweet angel.
Yeah, but listen.
I think I heard an audible sigh from you today when I was like, oh, he's an angel. Brad, he's an angel sent straight to earth. He said, and you were like, literally like, God damn it.
Yeah, he's an angel sent straight to earth to poop around our house in different places.
But I cut you off. Keep going. Yeah, I'm sorry.
But my point is this: the only pandering that I'm against is the pandering that is hollow, that doesn't come. In other words, listen, you can see from my not safe for work stuff that there's a real joy of that whole genre. All right.
Yeah.
Now, on the other hand, back in the early days of Evil Inc., I tried to create a character that was a dog because I saw all of these people. They'd put a dog in their strip or a cat in their strip, and all these dog lovers would go nuts over them. So I put a dog in my strip. Now, it was a dog with a human brain attached to its body, but it was a dog. It was an Evil Inc. dog. The dog had its fans as a character, but it never did the thing that I wanted it to do, which was bring me easy fans, because at the end of the day, I couldn't care less about dogs. And I couldn't even manufacture.
Yeah, it came through probably.
The enthusiasm. Yeah, I'm sure it came through. I couldn't write that character correctly to save my life because it just wasn't there. So I'm going to say, Dave, that we are always pandering, just to different degrees of effectiveness. And the only ones to feel upset about are the ones that you don't actually feel it for that topic. You're just doing it for the hits or the views.
Yeah, I mean, this is where, Brad, you and I, having done stand-up comedy, helps inform the process, because a comedian will throw out 10 jokes. 3 jokes will get a huge response. Well, guess what kind of gets expanded on and worked on more for the next set? Those 3 jokes versus the other 7, you know? And it's sort of a give and take of like, those jokes absolutely originated with that comic. They are from her heart, you know, she believes in them. Yeah. She pitches all 10, only 3 get a big response. She goes back to those 3 on the next set. You know what I mean? Like, and she really expands on them. Then they become a runner or that kind of thing. And so I'll speak from personal experience that with Sheldon, I like to think that I'm a many interested person in multiple topics. Mm-hmm. I've, over the course of 20 years, done 4,000 strips, all sorts of topics, Brad, on all sorts of areas. But you probably noticed there's a lot of Lord of the Rings strips in there. There's a lot of pug strips in there. There's a lot of coffee strips in there. There's a lot of literature strips in there. Because I've thrown out many topics, but the audience goes, hey, I really like those pug comic strips. And I go, maybe I'll do a few more of those. That gets a big... And by the way, as to Brad's point, they're from the heart. I love doing pug. I had a pug. We love doing pug comic strips. And so it's a self-reinforcing cycle of it's something of interest to you. The audience responds to it. You build on it. Right. But to Brad's point, not suitable for work comics are obviously a huge growth potential for any artist. But me, Dave Kellett, I get, as you've seen from the show, profoundly uncomfortable. And it's not native to me. I get sweaty and I don't want to talk about it. And I'm like, it doesn't, not the way that Brad does, where Brad has a joyful attitude towards it. Yeah. I have more of a, let's just say, a shame-based attitude towards it. Where I want to never talk about it. So for me, what I'm getting at there is that would be absolute worst pandering if Dave Kellett all of a sudden started drawing not suitable for work comics, because it's not intrinsic to me. It's not natural of what interests me in drawing. But what's less pandering, although still on the spectrum of pandering, but less egregious, is me loving dogs, loving specifically pugs. I do some pug comic strips. They get a good response. I do more pug comic strips. And then I eventually do so many pug comic strips that I do 3 books on pugs. And then I buy a Honda Odyssey van with that. That's what I do.
Right.
That's the course of action. And so, do I like my van? Yes, I do. So I don't mind that I did the pug comic strips because I did legitimately love and still love drawing comics about pugs because they are a ridiculous dog, and I love doing it.
Yeah,
and
but
thankfully, enough people responded to that. Go ahead, Brad. Go ahead.
I know from being at Los Angeles, where I was looking through your glove compartment on that Honda
Stop
Odyssey.
going through my glove compartment, you creep.
You also have a bunch of emergency Pop-Tarts, and I know you love Pop-Tarts, but if you did Pop-Tarts comics and they didn't resonate with the audience, no matter how much you love Pop-Tarts, you're not going to keep doing Pop-Tarts comics because they're not,
yeah.
you know what I mean? It's like that same formula works in reverse. In other words, if you do something and it resonates with an audience, you're going to do more of that stuff, but it's only going to work if the love is there. On the other hand, you can have a love for something and do comics about that. And if it doesn't resonate with your audience, you're going to do that. Well, maybe not never again, but you're going to do it less often, right?
Yep. In fact, I have 2 points I want to springboard off of that with Brad. One is poems and the other is crocodiles. And I'll tell you both, okay?
Oh, God, that's a great intro.
The first one, poems, to Brad's point, I love doing comic strips that have long-form poems and then an illustration attached, kind of Shel Silverstein-esque, right? And Brad, you've probably seen this where I have the characters like sitting under a tree and there's a long poem in a Sheldon, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm passingly okay at meter and my poetry is okay. And I really enjoy doing it. Like I love writing poems and having an illustration attached. It's a specific kind of comic that I love going back to maybe 2-3 times a year. Brad, I don't know that people like them, right? They've never gotten a huge response. No, what I'm getting at here is I don't go back to that well very frequently because I don't get a huge response from them. 1 or 2 people go like, oh, that's nice. That's passingly nice. But you can bet your Bippy Brad that if I had a big response to that, I would do poem comics all the time.
Right.
Like it would be 24-hour poem comics for me because I love doing them. But it's just not a format, mainly because people don't want to read that much that works online.
Yeah.
And so as much as I might like to do a whole book of Shel Silverstein stuff, it never has clicked for my audience.
Right.
So I don't do it. So that's a reverse example of like, I would love to do this thing. It's not clicking. So the logical non-pandering way to go about it is going to be like, as much as you have passion for it, Dave, don't keep doing that. Let yourself do it a couple times a year, but that's it. You know?
Yeah. Well, and that's where I want to speak out in defense of pandering, because and in defense of not safe for work comics, because I see this happening a lot online where somebody's like, oh, well, of course they're doing well. They're doing not safe for work stuff. Of course you can do well doing not safe for work stuff. It's just straight up pandering and it doesn't take anything and it's kind of a cheat. And I want to tell you, if you've got that attitude, do me a favor, prove it to yourself. Go out and try it. Try to do not safe for work and do it well and build a following. It's a lot more than drawing naked people. I can tell you because I've been doing it up front and I've been immersed in it. And I see people left and right where they're like, oh, yeah, I'm going to do this. And they do it. And it's like nobody's interested because it takes a lot more than just drawing naked people. And it's pandering is there's, I guess maybe we should make a differentiation between pandering and knowing your audience, right?
Well, I feel like there's probably a possibility here for a better vocabulary about what we're describing.
Yeah.
I feel like pure pandering is, I don't enjoy this thing, but it moves tickets. So I'm gonna perform this song even though I hate it. Right? That feels like pandering. There's a different one where it's more of a Venn diagram crossover of, these are all the 10,000 things that I enjoy. These are the 10,000 things that my audience enjoys. And in the middle, the crossover is where I don't pander, but I tilt my cartooning interest towards where the Venn diagram crosses over with my audience, you know?
Yeah.
So it's not pandering. These are all natural joys and loves that Brad Geiger has.
Right.
And he has seen of his audience's 10,000 likes that these 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 topics they really love. So in that crossover, he allows himself to keep going back to that well more frequently than he would another topic.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, and maybe we need a better word for that than pandering. In other words, I differentiate like between pandering that's effective and pandering that's hollow, but we might need a better terminology.
Can I suggest something? And this is totally off the cuff. Maybe that word is editing.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Maybe it's.
I mean, Brad, you love 10,000 topics, and would be happy to cartoon any of them. Your audience loves 10, so you self-edit down to what they love, and so it's a meeting in the middle kind of a thing,
Yeah.
Now, does that mean you only do what they love? Absolutely not. That's not at all what Brad and I are proposing.
Right.
We're just saying that when the mood is right, when you're in the mood to draw a dog comic, and your audience loves a dog comic, then go for it.
Yeah.
But you have to also be cognizant of the fact that you have to follow your loves, your passions, and if they change or if they don't fit a dog comic that day, then you don't draw a dog comic.
Right.
You can't force it, or then it becomes pandering.
Yeah. And the other part there is just to be honest with yourself, I guess. I coming around to the other side in defense of doing a certain amount of this, I'm going to just reiterate what I said at the top of the topic. We got into this business so that people would pay attention to us. And don't feel guilty for doing that. Don't feel guilty for letting a certain amount of that guide your decision making, because you're just being honest with yourself. This is, you wanted to have people pay attention to you. Of course, that's going to enter into your decision making.
The last point I wanted to make on that was about crocodiles. And I forgot to come back around to that. So Stefan Pastis does a strip called Pearls Before Swine. And Brad, we talked to Stefan in Los Angeles, and he said he wanted to come do the show. So we should have him on at some point. That would be fun. Anyway, Stefan, when I was up at his studio in Northern California, he had a list of rules up on his wall, pinned up on his wall. And it was a list of rules that the comic strip had to meet, like 6 or out of the 10 rules of the comic strip before he would send it off to the syndicate, right? And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I've never seen someone have a physical checklist of like, do I at least have these things so that it's a quote-unquote good comic strip? Okay, now it can go off to the editor. Anyway, one of his rules was don't go to the crocodiles too often. And I was like, oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Because his audience loves them, Brad. Goes nuts for those crocodiles. He likes drawing them.
Yeah.
So we all want to be loved. A natural inclination would be to make that whole strip. It's like what happened with Popeye or what happened with Barney Google. You just like, nope, the whole strip is about the crocodiles now. Well, here we go. It's all crocodiles all the time. But you got to be careful about that, because it's kind of a version of all things in moderation. If you go too big towards the thing that the audience responds to, you run the risk of its specialness being removed, and so kind of chase away your audience, even as you try to pander to them,
Right.
And so I think he's wise to say, don't go to the crocodiles too often, because they are a huge hit. But part of it is the specialness of it. It's like Boba Fett, really fun for Return of the Jedi. It's gonna be interesting if a Boba Fett movie would have been the same, because was he special and unique because he was this rare, mysterious thing? Like if you blew it out to a whole movie, would it become like the Han Solo movie where you're like, it's not so special, it's all about just that.
I'm kind of over this whole Han Solo thing.
Yeah, exactly. So sometimes you got to be careful in how far you lean into your willingness to cater to your audience. Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics. So this week's Comic Lab and all of the rest of Comic Lab for 2019 are brought to you by the good folks over at Wacom at WACOM.com. Wacom, the maker of Cintiq and Intuos and a bunch of other digital projects that Brad and I both use on a day-to-day basis. Brad has 2 in the studio. I have 3. We are great lovers of the product, and it is could not be more fitting of a sponsor to have on the show. It is like the comics gods have deigned us to find a Renaissance champion who promotes our painting like Michelangelo or Leonardo. And Wacom has come down with a digital pen on each shoulder, Brad, and said, "We dub thee good sharers of comic information on the internet." And so do go check them out over at wacom.com. Wacom, we thank them for sponsoring the show. And Brad, what is our next topic, my friend?
Yes. Thank you for the reminder. Our next topic is coming over from our... I was so...
You wanted to get that dig in so bad.
So our next question's coming in from our good friend Kevin, who says, "Hi, fellas. I know Brad's been pressuring Dave to make the move to Clip Studio Paint. However, is Dave aware that CSP does not let you work in a native CMYK space format, only RGB? To me, that makes the software useless for color print work. And if, like Brad, Dave plans to draw in CSP and color in Photoshop, why not just keep doing everything in Photoshop? Curious as to your thoughts. Dave, why would you want to switch over to CSP when it doesn't work in a native CMYK format?"
Now, listen, I already know as a friend that you're going to say, like, CSP can do 1,000 things that Photoshop can't do in terms of specifically drawing comics. And you would be right about that, Brad.
Yeah.
You would be right. But before we get into this topic too deeply, I want to say that even you would admit that it's kind of half-assed that a program specifically designed for creating comics, ostensibly for a chunk of it for print, it is weird and a little bit lame that they have not yet programmed in CMYK abilities into CSP. You at least acknowledge that, right?
You will get no argument from me. It should be there. And I expect it in an update soon, but I don't know how soon is, but I expect eventually we're going to see an update and they say, "Oh, look, we're working in CMYK now."
Because, and here's part of the problem, is that for the Japanese and American audiences that this program is primarily designed for, they're basically saying, "Hey guys, CSP is the program you want to make comics with. It's amazing. But if you want to color it, you're going to need to also buy Photoshop." And so people will be like, "Well, why don't I just buy Photoshop? Why buy two programs when I can just do it in Photoshop?" And partially that's true, although the counter argument to Kevin's point is that CSP can do so many things with voice bubbles, with panels, with perspective, with character design, with models built into the program. All of that is legitimately amazing. And one of the reasons why I want to, even though I have not yet dived over to that program, is because all of those tools are custom and specific to comics and unique and amazing. But it's really lame, Brad, if you're like, "Brad, I've designed this beautiful new car for you. It's got everything you need except for a seat. You're going to need to bring your own seat. You're going to have to bring your own seat for this car. Also, no seatbelts. No seatbelts."
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, Dave. Last week I went to Home Depot. And for the express purpose, I bought a hammer at the Home Depot. And I said, "I want to take this hammer. I want my money back. This is."
I knew you were going to go to a toolbox reference on this. I knew it. I keep going.
I got this hammer. I want my money back, I says to the guy. And the guy looks at me and says, why don't you like the hammer? Does it hammer and nails? And I go, yeah, that's fine. It hammers and nails. He says, that little pointy thing at the end, if you hammer a nail in, you need to get the nail back out. Can you pull the nail out? And I said, "Oh, yeah. No problem there. It's fine." And he says, "Well, why do you want your money back?" I said, "It doesn't work on screws. And that's been another big week of Brad Makes a Vaudeville Joke. All right, Brad Geiger, hailing from Philadelphia, PA. You know him, you love him. Yes, that's been Brad's description of a hammer that can't be used to do screw diving. All right, Brad Geiger, Philadelphia, PA. Oh, I thought I turned the music off and it didn't turn off. And I was like, "Oh, damn it, the timing." So to my point, it's called using the right tool for the job. CSP is the right tool, in my opinion, for drawing comics for all the reasons that you've already laid out perfectly well. And Photoshop is the right tool for coloring it. And by the way, saying that it's cost prohibitive, I don't know if I'm ready to sign off on that. CSP is very inexpensive. Photoshop, you've got the monthly subscription, but let's face it, if you're doing work as a independent artist, you're using Photoshop for you're already using Photoshop and you're using it for 110 other things, prepping images for social media, etc. So of course you use the right tool for the job. And that means in this case, you've got two different tools, one for drawing, one for coloring. And you should not be upset about that, in my opinion. It's just using the right tool. And why would I want to go back to Photoshop and give up all that stuff I get from CSP just because I can't do one part of the process? Hey, I can't post to Twitter from CSP. Should I throw it overboard from that too? I don't understand expecting CSP to do everything. I like that it does what it does so well.
Okay, listen, I understand and I get you. And the tool metaphor is a good one.
Yeah.
And so bravo to you. But to your earlier point, a hammer you can get for a cheap one for $10, a screwdriver you can get for $3, and Photoshop hundreds of dollars a year to subscribe to that thing on Creative Cloud.
And you're going to use it every day for this and every other project that you do.
I know, but to Kevin's point, why not just stick with Photoshop? And granted, the counterpoint is because CSP does comics so well.
Wait a minute. What's your argument? I'm paying hundreds of dollars a year for Photoshop. My problem is that I'll be spending hundreds of dollars plus a one-time purchase of $75. That's your argument?
No, my argument is fundamentally that if they were able to program in that it can handle RGB colors, for God's sake, take an extra month and program in that you can handle CMYK colors. It's not reinventing the wheel. This is not something that no one's ever thought of before, that comics are going to go into print. It's like, wait, what? What? No one told us that you'd need to color these manga comics. Why am I? I'm so flustered. Like,
but your whole argument,
unheard of.
Your whole
Brad,
argument.
this is like, no, come on. This is like what I said at the top of the conversation. It's like saying, no, CSP can do everything. It can do inks. It can do layout. It just can't do penciling. That's the one thing it can't do. It can't do penciling. So you got to pencil in Photoshop, then bring it over into CSP. You just grant Kevin and I are outraged that if CSP is asking us to switch over, it's dumb that they don't have a major part of the comics making process built into the software. That you already granted that, so we don't need to go over it. But
I agree that it's frustrating, but refusing to use CSP because of it is literally cutting your nose off to spite your face.
What? My nose is a jerk, and that's why I'm happy to do it.
You're completely hurting yourself. You're already spending the hundreds of dollars, whatever it is, for a Photoshop subscription. You're already spending that. So financially, you're only spending the extra money is very affordable, and it's a one-time expense. So let's take money off the table. It's negligible. It's just a question of using the right tool for the job. Now, I agree that it's frustrating that you got to use both. However, I will also acknowledge that when you export a multi-layer CSP document into Photoshop, all the layers are exactly where they were, exactly the way I have them set up. It's a clean transition to Photoshop. You're not giving up anything. It's a very easy step. And then you use Photoshop for what it's done for. I agree that it's frustrating. I don't agree how you guys both throw your hands up and cut your nose off to spite your face and refuse to work in CSP because of it. I understand the frustration. I don't understand hurting yourself out of the frustration.
Well, that's a fair response. I can't say anything other than you're right. It is small-minded at times of me to be like, my continuing refusals to use CSP, and for varying reasons, some of which are logical, some of which are illogical. So I grant you that in this situation in my life, I am probably wrong, and so Kevin's outrage is probably misdirected as well. But I will grant him this, at least a small point, that it's so weird to not. It's weird to not have CMYK native into the program. It's just weird.
Agreed.
It's really weird.
Agreed.
It's just
100% agreed.
And you know what? Let's make this a learning moment, because I'm realizing that some of our younger listeners might not be familiar with what RGB is versus CMYK. And Brad literally is one of the best people I know in this field. So can you describe very quickly, Brad, what RGB is versus CMYK?
Yeah, it's an important distinction to understand. But the short form is, if you're going to print books, you got to have your colors in CMYK format. The reason for that is RGB is built for monitors and screens, and you have a capability of producing millions of colors in RGB. CMYK, on the other hand, is set up for print. And it breaks down every full color image into a combination of cyan, yellow, magenta, and black. CMYK, K stands for black because they didn't want to confuse black and blue and call them both Bs. So it's CMYK, and it's only capable of tens of thousands of colors. In other words, there are a lot of colors that you can see in RGB that you can't reproduce in CMYK. That's why you have to have your colors prepped in CMYK for print, because if you set them RGB, there's a bunch of those colors they can't reproduce. So you've got to be in CMYK mode when you're sending stuff off to print. And it's super frustrating that that's not available in CSP. I agree. But again, it's something that I think that eventually we're going to see an update.
And so just to finish off that point,
Yeah.
when you have a level for cyan and it says 32, and you have a level for magenta and it says 48, what that's specifically saying at the printing process is it literally lets the machine know how much of that to inject onto the page. Like, this is how much cyan, this is how much magenta. Whereas RGB gives a pixel the knowledge that, or the data that it needs to know how to present an orange or a green, both of which print terrible, but on a screen look beautiful and vibrant. And so RGB just gives different data sets to the program that's handling that image.
Yeah.
And then just to finish off the topic, just because we never talk about CMYK, okay, so they made K black K because they didn't want it to rhyme or have the same letter as blue, right?
Right.
But then the dummy said, but then let's not even call blue blue. Let's call it cyan. So then you got a C. And it's like, you know what will also confuse people? Let's not call red red. Let's call it magenta. So then we got C for cyan, M for magenta, Y for yellow. Okay, yellow makes sense because that's fine. We'll just keep that one. And then K for black. Let's confuse everyone. Let's make this the worst naming structure ever.
Back up. That magenta is magenta, though, because it's not red. It's a pink. And the only way you can get red is by combining 100% magenta and 100% yellow.
Oh, that's actually true. You know what? Brad's right. Okay, but I stand by the cyan. And black
they could have
thing.
very easily called that blue, and it would have been just fine. But yeah, it's whoever made that decision was being overly cautious. But if you want
just
to
a funny
prove this
sequence
yourself,
of events, like no, we can't say black because that's got a B in it. But then you know what? Let's not even call blue blue. That's fine. We're fine.
Not, and nobody gets a B. But if you want to prove this to yourself, open up a Photoshop document in RGB mode and fill it with 100% green, or what that would be like 255.
Or an orange. Orange is also good.
Yeah, and then just fill that screen with that intense green, and then switch to CMYK mode, and you'll see the color shift is remarkable. Like, you can't even get close to that RGB green. You can't even approach it, and that will show you. That's a very overemphasized view of what we're talking about here. There's a lot of colors you can't even approach in CMYK for RGB, and that's why it's dangerous to work in RGB mode. Also, just how it breaks down the blacks for your line art. There's a whole lot of reasons you don't want to screw around with RGB mode in your comics if you've got print on the horizon.
And I'll tell you a story about that. Just Grandpa pulls you a chair up by the fire here to tell you a story. One of the reasons why it's dangerous for someone to color in RGB, hoping that when they bring it over to Photoshop, they can just convert it over to CMYK and no problems at all, right?
Oh yeah.
When in my Mattel days, and I'm sure Brad has better stories than this, in my Mattel days, we were redesigning the Polly Pocket packaging, and we went really heavy on greens and oranges, which, by the way, notorious for being hard to print right, like really bad colors to pick. But we went a green and orange. And I don't know why, one of our designers designed and showed it to the marketing team on screen, like in an RGB format. And they're like, wow, this is so vibrant and bright and beautiful. And then when we did the color tests in the packaging, because it's CMYK, it comes out as a muted kind of toned down green, muted kind of toned down orange, because you literally cannot replicate what you see on a screen onto a printed page. And so that's why just be careful as you put your first toes into coloring your comics, that you're learning the CMYK process versus RGB, because if you can find a great color in CMYK and it still looks good in RGB, all the more power to you. But make sure that you start in that CMYK process, because you're going to be really disappointed when you convert the other way, you know?
Right. Absolutely. And if there are some people that just insist on RGB, there's a lot of filters and stuff in Photoshop that only work in RGB. And if that's you, remember, you can work in RGB and preview it on your screen in CMYK. In other words, you can work in RGB and see what it's going to look like in CMYK. You can do the CMYK preview. Just for the love of all that's good and pure, remember to convert that to an actual CMYK document at the end of your process.
Yeah, it's the equivalent sometimes of like the advertisement of what your hamburger is going to look like at McDonald's versus what you actually get at McDonald's.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
You know, RGB is going to make your hamburger look, the lettuce, so crisp and juicy, and the cheese is melting just perfectly down the corner of the burger. And then you go to a McDonald's and you ask for it in CMYK, and it's like, here is your burger. We've reduced the amount of human spit in it for you, so here you go.
Here's your burger.
Yeah, it's just Ziggy at the window. Thank you. Come again. I've been Ziggy.
Well, listen, Dave, I think we pretty much put that topic to rest.
Yeah. Well, that's perfect because I actually want to transition, Brad, to a tweet that I got this week. And it frustrated me enough that I wanted to share this with you and share this with our audience because I'm just going to read it out to you. They said, Dave, I would love to back you on Patreon, but I follow so much art that if I back you, I have to back 50 other artists. Yeah. So it's just a no-go economically for me. And Brad, I had 1,000 immediate reactions to that. But I wanted to get your reaction cold. Just listening to that. By the way, someone reached out. They didn't have to say anything, by the way, Brad. That was option one.
Right.
Option one is just stay quiet,
just
right?
Say nothing.
You don't have to say anything.
That was
just
my first
point.
Yeah, that was my first point. If you're somebody that has this thought in your head and you want to share it, don't. Keep that thought to yourself, because
this is the equivalent of someone. It's like kind of my grandmother used to say, like just keep it to yourself. Like, hey, Brad, reaching out to tell you that your nose looks funny. Gotta go. Bye.
Yeah, I could have lived without that tweet about my nose.
Right, exactly. You know? So, Brad, okay, so your first pass reaction, I'm glad to hear, is kind of similar to mine. But go a little deeper onto the actual thought behind this. Well, Dave, I would love to back you on Patreon, but I follow so much art that if I backed you, I would have to back 50 other artists.
This, oh my God, this to me.
And by the way, so the end result is I don't back any of them. That's the kicker to this.
Right. Well,
it blows my mind.
That's amazingly convenient, isn't it? That the upshot of all of this is that he pays $0.00. That's a very convenient upshot for him.
What a coinky dink.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if the upshot for him is that he paid $10 at the end of the month? That'd be a nice upshot that he had to follow his morals that closely. But
Brad, I love all sorts of different kinds of food when I eat during the month. I love it. I love breakfast. I love lunch. But God, there's so many different kinds. I can't pay for any one food, and so I'm just going to eat this all for free. So I'm going to starve. Is the way that is. I can't choose between.
I can't make a choice between the food, so I'm just going to starve. And the other, so it's a disingenuous point. It's a really nobody is fooled by this. Nobody is faked by this. Nobody buys it. Nobody believes it. But besides being disingenuous, how full of self-worth is this person to put this thought out into the world? In other words, how important does he think he is? Does he really think that we're all watching him every day? Like all the web cartoonists, you and me and Scott Kurtz and Jeff Jacks and Meredith and Aaron, Erica Moen, and everybody is all looking at him. Dylan's looking in.
Hey, Brad.
Jeff Parker's looking in.
Brad, did you hear from Clarence yet? Has he backed one of us, Brad?
No.
Is Clarence coming big on? Erica says she hasn't gotten a back yet. Oh God, Brad.
I just heard from Jack. I just heard from Jeff, and he says that he was thinking about maybe one of us, but he hasn't decided yet. We're all nothing today, but maybe tomorrow we'll find out. Have you heard anything from Scott?
Yeah, you're right. I hadn't even thought about this, Brad. It's like a self-importance of like, I know you'd all love to be backed by me, but I don't know.
Like we're all watching him.
See what Clarence does.
Like we're all watching him, waiting to see who he's going to bestow his dollar on. Who's going to get Clarence's dollar?
Fingers crossed by the sides of our head going, choose me, choose me, choose me, choose me.
Don't you, Scott. Don't you, Scott. You like me better. Please, I want your dollar. Oh, my
and then,
God.
Brad, here's the follow-up to that thought. I see that Clarence has backed you, and I immediately email Clarence going, wait a minute, I know you read my stuff too. This is unfair. You have to follow me now. By the rules of the internet, you have to back me on Patreon.
By the rules of webcomics, I caught you following one. Now me and 49 others are going to be standing in line with our hands out. And by the way, you better fill it or else we're going to see to it that our comic doesn't go to your computer. We can do that now. The president of webcomics says we can do it.
Yeah, and don't think we're not tracking you because we've got you on multiple Excel sheets. We're tracking you all over the place. We know what you're reading, Clarence.
That's right, Clarence. We know what you're reading. Oh, the self-importance of that tweet just kills me. It's like, you know what?
Well, so here's...
Go ahead.
No, I want to hear from you because I'm a little flustered by this. So
Really?
Go ahead. You go ahead. Yeah.
So here's the deal. If you don't want to back somebody on Patreon, you absolutely do not have to back that person on Patreon. Nobody's keeping track. Nobody's charting this. And by the way, it's perfectly fair for you to say you don't want to back people on Patreon. But to come up with these disingenuous reasons why that somehow mystically clear you of the guilt that shouldn't even be there in the first place, that's silly. And it also it actually is worse than if you would have said nothing at all. Silence would have been so much better. You know what a better tweet would have been? Here's what he could have said. Here's a better tweet. Hey, Dave, love your stuff.
Yes, Brad, yes, exactly. That was my exact thought. That's all that needs to be said.
Isn't that a nice tweet?
In the transactional nature that is free comics being freely distributed, that's fine. I'll take that because... listen, I know how this works. I know that I have tens of thousands of more readers than will ever buy a book, will ever go to Patreon, and that's fine. That is the transaction that I've signed up for here. I will give you my comics for free, and then a percentage of you in your heart of hearts will think that mine is either number one or number two or number three of your favorite things of art online, and you'll say, I like this person. I like what they put out in the world. I want to support them. I know that that's what the transaction is, right?
Yeah.
And I also know for me as a reader, I'm at any given point trying out a few dozen to a few hundred different things online. Newspapers, magazines, comics, musicians.
Right.
Not all of them are going to get money from me.
Right.
In fact, the vast 99% of them won't. But the 1% that really trigger, I'm going to go, you know what? They mean something to me. I value them in my life. I value their work. I'm going to give them some money. Now, on an individual nature, that doesn't make a career. But in aggregate, that's how artists and magazines and newspapers build a career, right? So I get so frustrated by this because why point it out? Why point out what you're not doing?
Right.
Because I'm okay. Brad, I'll tell you, now I'm mad. I'm going to keep talking. I am 100%. I am fully 100%, 1,000% as a good person. When someone emails me and says, Dave, I've had a tough year. I cannot afford to back you. I can't get a book. I don't want to give you the whole outline, but it's been a really tough year for my family. I swear to God, Brad, I email every time and say, don't worry. The comic is here free. Read it as much as you want. And maybe a few years down the line, when the luck is smiling a little better on your life, we'll meet at a Comic-Con and I'll give you a free sketch when you get a book or something. No worries. Read it for free. That's a transaction that I love to have conversationally online because honest to God, Brad, as artists, we're not just about the dollars. We are about sharing our art and we're making people's lives better. And if you are in a tough moment, that's when comics are most needed. And very frequently you can't spend the money. And I get that. You get that. Chris Straub gets that.
Right.
Meredith Grant gets that. Erica Moen gets that. We all understand. We've been there. And so it's okay to say that. It's not okay to say like, I can't choose among the 50 of you, so none of you are going to get any support at all. By the way, enjoying them, love them, make my life better. Bye.
And by the way, speaking of disingenuous arguments, he can, if he's got 50 artists, he can absolutely be a backer to all 50. All it takes is signing up to Patreon today, backing one of them, canceling that pledge next month after his payment is processed, and becoming a backer to number 2 on the list. And then enjoying that Patreon And then after a month and his payment is processed, he goes on to number 3, because once you're signed up with Patreon, it's a very simple process to cancel one pledge and start another, and cancel that pledge and start another. He could spend the next couple of years enjoying himself, getting as far into the list of 50 as he can, as he wants to, and he can give a certain amount of support to each one of these people. It's disingenuous to suppose that he couldn't possibly do it. The truth of the matter is, it would be the easiest thing in the world to do.
Yeah. And while we said before that sometimes it's better not to even comment on it, let's say, Brad, that you got an email saying, hey, Brad, here's what I'm doing. I really love 50 artists. So if you see me cancel at the end of this month, what I'm doing is over the course of the next 3 years, I'm going to try to rotate my support in a small way for all these different artists. You might, Brad, say, well, it's a little weird, but that's a nice way to do it. Okay, great. Thank you for the email, right? But the better thing is to just do it. Don't even send the email, because why you're making it weird when it doesn't need to be weird, you know?
When you cancel a pledge, Patreon basically gives you a little check mark list that says, why are you canceling your pledge? And you can send a little note to the creator. And all you got to do in that situation is put in a little note in there saying, I still love the work. Keep up the good stuff, whatever. I loved it. Maybe I'll be back later, whatever. And then done. Here's the deal. And this is actually a problem that I think we can resolve. No creator expects a Patreon backer to stay month after month after month after month. Every month you stay is good. We love you when you stay for a long time, but nobody expects you to stay forever. We're realistic people. We don't stay forever when we become Patreon backers ourselves. We don't expect you to be a forever backer. We're very thrilled for every month that you do back. And if that's only 1 month, then if that's right for you, great. You still gave us a huge compliment, but nobody expects you to be there forever. And then, Dave, you, on the other hand, like you said earlier, and I see this on my levels all the time, you get somebody who's been a backer for months, if not years, and a high upper tier backer that'll send you a note saying, I'm so sorry I'm dropping out. My wife just got diagnosed with cancer, and we've got to tighten our belts and we've got to watch our budget. That's the kind of person that you want to reach through the computer and just hold them in your arms and say, use your money on something important for your wife.
God, go spend it somewhere else. Yeah.
Go buy flowers. Go have dinner out. Do whatever. I don't want your patronage in that situation. A couple times I was like, here's next month's links. You need naked people more than anybody else. Just take them. I want you to be happy. Nobody expects you to stay on a Patreon longer than your budget allows. Nobody expects that. Right. Criminy.
Well, I think one of the reasons why this frustrated me, and again, going back to the central point that you don't need to send anything, a nothing tweet would have been better than this.
Yep.
Is because what it does is it immediately betrays a consciousness of guilt when you say something like that,
Yeah.
And if you take as your definition of guilt, like the idea of the little inner voice that's telling you like, maybe you should do X, Y, Z, right? That's fundamentally what guilt is. Like maybe there's a better way to do this, right?
Right.
As soon as this person is sending this tweet, it's a betrayal that they are feeling that consciousness of their guilt in the situation. Like, I know I should back this art that means the world to me, and I know I do buy myself a $4 latte every day, and supporting Erica Moen would be just a removal of one of those lattes a month.
Right.
But can't do it because there's 50 of you. So anyway, on my way, reading all 50 of you forever. Bye. It's a weird betrayal of like, but I hope you'll absolve me of this because I've made it clear why I can't back anybody,
Yeah. Yeah. And at the end of the day, there should be no guilt. This is something this is part of what we do. We wouldn't be putting it out there for free if we didn't want you to read it for free.
I know it to be the case because it's the same way for me with music, with art, with books. There are a ton of things that you consume that you enjoy. You're like, oh, that was perfectly lovely, but you don't feel a desire to overly support or keep going back to that artist, and that's fine. I know that's the case with me too. They're like, oh, Dave Kellett, he's okay. Yeah, his comics are so. They're fine.
He's really making a go of it.
He's sure making a go of it. But because the idea is that in aggregate, I hope that there are a core group that are like, no, Dave really does mean something to me, and I'm going to support his art, whether it's with a book purchase or original art or a Patreon or a Kickstarter or whatever it is. And so it just makes it weird when someone like, yeah, hey, Brad, I'm emailing you just to tell you that I love you, but you're never going to get a handshake from me. I would never handshake you. You know, like, why are you emailing me that? Why would you do that?
I don't need this information.
I know, exactly. Anyway, it's weird because it's standoutish. Normally, there's such lovely support, and people intuitively know not to send that kind of a tweet or an email. So it's always funny when it comes up because, gosh, it gets my goat in a way that I don't normally get aggravated by something like that. But it's like, why point out that? I don't know.
Why are you calling attention to this?
Yeah, why do you keep pointing at my nose and laughing? Just let it be, you know, that kind of thing.
When it comes down to it, Dave, there are so many better things to say than that. He could, like I said, he could have said, hey, Dave, I love your stuff. He could have said, Dave, thanks for the years of good times and laughs. If he wanted to, Dave, he could have said this. You've been listening to ComicLab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
And then I would say, well, Brad, I listen to about 50 podcasts, so there's no way I can listen to this podcast anymore. It's really good. I love this podcast, but I listen to about 50 of them. And so I'll just say that your hosts have been Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and cartoonist of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And my friend Dave Kellett, co-director of Stripped and cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And a reminder that our sponsor this week and all the way through 2019 is the good folks over at Wacom at wacom.com. Go check out the Cintiqs and Intuos and all the other drawing tablets, computers, and pens that they have over there. And we thank them for the sponsorship. And the Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
Comic Lab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/comiclab. So we're going to go ahead and say that twice. Patreon.com/comiclab.
So listen, Marianne, I think you're just a tremendous girl. I love you so much. But listen, I also love like 50 other girls. So there's no way that we can date in high school here. It's just not going to happen. You're a real special gal. But because I love 50 other ones, I can't date anybody. There's no one I can't make any sort of choice in my life. My agency is completely removed from myself in this process. So anyway, I'm not going to date anybody.
Surprisingly enough, this is exactly how to become a bachelor at 80 years old.